This is the Life with Grief podcast, the podcast that talks about and normalizes the complexities of grief, life after loss, and all this entails, and so much more. I want you to think of this podcast as a safe space where I'm a friendly face and we're just journeying through this together to figure out how to live life with our grief in tow. I'm your host, Tara Accardo. I'm a grief and transformational life coach, and I'm here to serve you guidance, support, tangible coping tools, inspiration, and some laughs along the way to help you cultivate a more meaningful, intentional, and beautiful life. But grieving or not, we're getting into countless topics here on the podcast, from coping with loss to self-development and so much more. I'm so grateful you're here. Let's dive right in. Hey guys, before we get into it, I just wanted to pop in and introduce today's guest. We are chatting with Shea Wingate, who is a licensed therapist and grief coach and a fellow griever just like me and probably you. And she has actually graced the podcast before, and I am super excited to have her back for this little series that we're doing here. So she created this awesome Grief Myths mini series. All of the details are linked in the show description, and we are going to talk all about it in this episode today. But we thought this would be an awesome opportunity to come together and just dispel some of these and just have like a fun lightning round, high-level conversation about each one of these. So we wanted to make these as sort of bite-sized for you as possible. So this little series is going to be split into 3 parts. So this is part 1 of 3, and I really hope you enjoy it. We had a lot of fun with this one, and these myths are seriously no joke, but they are some of the things that can really get us kind of stuck in our grief. So I think it's really worth talking about today. I am super excited to get into it. So without further ado, let's do it. Shea, welcome back to the podcast. I am really happy to have you back on and to dig into these topics with you today, because I feel like these can never be talked about enough, and we are long overdue to address this here on the podcast. So I want to get right into it. And I'm really happy that we're having this be more conversational today, as opposed to me just kind of like going off on these topics by myself. And I'm just really excited to have your kind of like knowledge and expertise, not only with what you do for a living, but like your own experience as a griever. So I think it's gonna be an awesome conversation. But as I mentioned in the intro, you have created something really amazing and really valuable pertaining to the topics that we're going to be getting into today and in this series. So do you maybe want to just touch on that first a little bit before we even start, and then we can get into it?
Yeah, I am so excited to be here, to be back, to be talking about this grief myth mini series. The reason I created it is because personally, I had so many grief myths, and professionally, I see these in my clients all the time. And if you had asked me before I experienced grief, like, do you have any grief myths? I would be like, no, no way. I know exactly what grief is like, especially since I'm a therapist and I had studied grief, and I really thought I like understood, but they're so sneaky and they really trip us up. And that's why I created this mini series, because I wanted people to be able to kind of spot them in their own lives. And also, it's a great tool to help us be more educated about grief and our grief literacy. So it's 13 modules. Within each module, I have a video from me, a journal prompt, and some really practical self-care activities. This is self-paced. It's only $30. You can go back to it as many times as you want. It's a paid page on my website, so you don't need a special app. I just wanted to make it so easy for people to access some really good information and to have some tools that they can use in their life. So, we're going to talk about the different myths that I cover throughout our time on this episode and then some future ones, so people can get a sense of some of the things that I see all the time coming up for grievers.
Yeah. Amazing. Seriously, and like I just, as a griever myself and like someone in this space, I'm so grateful that you've made it like so easily accessible, because like it's crazy how some of, these grief myths are things that we hear, but then sometimes like when they happen in our lives, they can really trip us up, and they can like you said, and make us feel like we're kind of doing things wrong, or like it just makes our grieving journey so much harder. And so I think it's worth talking about for sure. Awesome. Okay. Well, let's get right into it. So I love this first one. I love it and I hate it. But
Yeah.
first, grief myth. Everything happens for a reason. I have a love-hate relationship with this sentiment, but I want to hear your thoughts on
Yeah,
this.
I had to tackle this one. Oh my gosh, like we hear this one all the time. It's so interesting because grief myths can be external or internal, so we have to be careful about that. Like,
Great
I
point.
mean, if someone was saying to me everything happens for a reason, I would be immediately able to like spot that. But like what I wasn't able to spot sometimes was my own internal version of everything happens for a reason, which is like I need to find a way to figure out how to like use this experience, which of course, like I have grown from the experience, I am changed from the experience, but it wasn't some like karma or some like lesson I had to learn in life. It was something that horrible that happened, and suffering is a real part of life. And if we think everything happens for a reason, sometimes we can be, like pushing down like the pain that we need to feel during grief. And really it's not necessarily true that it happens for a reason. Yes, I can make meaning from my loss, I can grow from my loss, but it's not some sort of like punishment for me. And it's not something I need to like dose with toxic positivity.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, I think that yeah, the toxic positivity is a important thing to bring up because yeah, I feel like it just sort of invalidates things that we're feeling like you've alluded to. And it's so funny. I used to be that girl, that everything happens for a reason girl. And in a way there's like parts of me that do believe that, or like, like there's kind of no coincidences in life, but I have such like a weird on-off relationship with it. I think now more after my parents died, like you might be able to relate to this. Like, there's some people that believe that everything happens for a reason, gung-ho, and then something super profoundly tragic happens and you question all of that. It's like, your whole belief system can be questioned sometimes. So this was like a big one for me, like, especially I feel like in the beginning, but I think like really where we could almost like, I'm not gonna say leave this one, but like, I think the biggest like takeaway that I've also personally taken away is what you said. Like, it's not that our parents died for a reason. It's not that we have these losses because this was, like you said, like some karmic journey or whatever. Although some people could argue that that's the thing, and that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, it's like I don't know. That touches me because that's really the premise of losses become gains too. It's just like, it's not that our losses had to happen for a reason, but it's like, okay, but they did happen. So what do you then make of it? And that is entirely up to you. And sometimes that can be intimidating and really scary, or we feel a lot of pressure to like, do something big or not even big, just like, make something of it. But it can also just be the ways in which that we care for ourselves or others or whatever growth or learnings or whatever that come out of it. And it's not something we need to put pressure on. It's just like, wow, okay, like this happened, this sucked, but my life doesn't have to, end here, so to speak, like not literally, but just like,
Mhm.
because, I don't know, you probably see this too. Like I see comments all the time on social media. Like I'm sure people that maybe work with say this too. There's like, I feel like my life isn't the same, or like, whether or not they mean it, they're like, I don't feel like my life is worth living. Like it's lost all meaning, it's lost all value. Like, and people can really spiral with this. So,
Yeah.
it's just those baby steps every single
Mhm.
day. It's not like, think that there was a reason for something, but just, how can we, I don't know, move forward with it as a part of us and something that we can, redirect our energy for good, I guess, for lack of a
Yeah.
better
I think
term.
one of my big things with this one is like if I need to believe that everything happens for a reason, then I can't do that kind of questioning that you were mentioning, like that
Mhm.
you would want to like question things and like dive deep. And that's, I don't want people to not be able to do that because that's such an important experience and getting to know their grief. But if I think it has to be for this like positive reason, then I can't like look at some of these like painful sides of the grief, and it really like limits me. So
Yeah.
not that we can't make meaning or there can't be like, gains from this loss, like your whole premise, but like I need to maybe put that belief aside for a moment and allow myself to look at this and to not be afraid to do that. And if you're afraid to like kind of look at the, dark side of grief and it feels overwhelming, totally understandable, but like let somebody help you and guide you in doing that. So I think that's sort of my concern about this myth, is that it stunts the process a little bit.
That's such a great point. Like I had thought of it that way, I guess, but like to really frame it in that way is such a good point. And I know people struggle with facing that head on, or whether it's head on or just at all in whatever capacity they can. But it is something that we like inevitably have to warm up to, because it's gonna kind of hunt us down.
And there's like a lot to learn there in those really, hard places. And you don't have to go alone. And in fact, nobody expects you to go alone. So if you're afraid to go to that place, like I get it, I was too, but like let people support you and guide you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Oh my gosh. I love this point. And by the way, I should have prefaced this episode with all of these things we're talking about today. Obviously, we could get into much bigger conversations about each one of these, but because this is sort of a quicker round shorty episode today, we're going to touch on these high level. But again, with what Shea has created, like that is where you can really get more into the nitty gritty with this, and like further on how to cope and all those good things. So I just want to mention that
And grief is so unique. So yeah. Like
touching on these very high level, but
yes.
it's still good to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So myth number 2, another good one.
I'm trying to read like my one liner about this one so I don't talk about it for an hour.
Seriously. Time heals all wounds. Yes. Another one I have thoughts and feelings about, but shoot.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So my high level thought on this is that healing is an active process. Like I can't stress that enough. And we think, or we like to think, that the passage of time will make things better, but that's not necessarily true, because like I said, healing is an active process. And like you're learning how to carry this grief, and over time you can learn how to carry this grief, and that could be stress, anxiety, anger, jealousy. So if you're not actively like moving towards it, you're carrying your grief into your new normal. But like if you don't have an active role in shaping that grief and getting to know it and guiding it, then you will be carrying it into your new normal in maybe a way that it's not so empowering.
Yeah, it's heavy. And like you're carrying such that burden. Yeah. And I think I realized, like, at least I'm only speaking for myself, my own journey, like time alone certainly does not heal, right? It's exactly what you said. Like if you don't put in if you don't get the right support, or if you don't, just get the right coping tools, and you find the things that work for you, that inspire you along the way to make living with your grief more like digestible and like easier. I do feel like, there are certain parts of our grief that will like be less intense with time, because just inevitably we get a little bit further away. But that being said, and I definitely feel this way, like going through a phase in my life recently where I just had my daughter, there was a lot of like chaos around her birth, and that really brought up a lot of things for me. But that can also happen on a daily basis. Like it's in the little moments and it's in those big moments. Like we don't necessarily have to have these huge milestones to, have our grief kind of brought up to the surface, and in familiar ways or completely unfamiliar ways. And so you're kind of like re-grieving certain things, or you're just like, oh, okay, haven't had to approach it this way before. How do I do that now? So yeah. And there's obviously I see this with certain comments. I have had people kind of imply this to me, sort of like, why aren't you over it by now? Like, I feel like that's sort of a subset of this, like, time heals all wounds thing, is like that, like, it's been a while. Why can't you just be happy? Like those types of like very minimizing comments that just makes me so sad, and it's so interesting too, because like I've seen them from people who have also lost some big people in their life, or, they've seen loss and they know grief, yet they still have those beliefs. So I just think it's so interesting. And it's, I feel like everyone just kind of has their own like belief about time and grief and how it heals or doesn't or whatever. So I don't know. I would love to hear like whatever closing thoughts you have on that, but that is definitely something I've witnessed and have had to navigate in my own grief journey, is like the imposing thoughts of other people on my own grief journey. And I'm like,
yeah, well, if they need to like comment on your grief journey, like, why aren't you like over it more positive? I would wonder like how are they doing, honestly? Like,
seriously.
Yeah. So maybe they were hoping that maybe it's like a projection to like that they were hoping time would heal their wound. But like grief could be like a trauma, like depending on like how you lost someone, how they died, who died, when they died, like all of these different factors. And it doesn't necessarily like traumas don't necessarily heal with time. We have to learn how to like become safe in the world again and process what happened. So, it's important for listeners to think about like the grief that they experienced. And if it was like, especially if it was like a traumatic loss, then I would really encourage them to get help, because over time that trauma and that loss and like those symptoms can turn into something and that gets even bigger. So like time doesn't necessarily heal wounds, but it can like make whatever is there like more normal for you or become bigger as time passes. And if that's anxiety, that's not really what you want to grow in your life.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And can affect your body and everything too. I mean,
Oh,
just like
yeah.
physically and mentally, like, just, and I don't know, I always joke, like I can feel when I'm
Mhm.
kind of going through something in my neck and my shoulders, which I think is common for a lot of people, of course, but
Yeah.
yeah, and it can manifest itself in so many ways. So I think, I don't know, I just giving ourselves all the grace in the world with
Mhm.
this time thing. And also understanding that this is so oversaid in the grief space, but it is going to ebb and flow. The
Mhm.
intensity is going
Mhm.
to wane a little bit, and
Mhm.
just I just
Mhm.
embrace that, because like that sucks, but
Yeah.
just like hold space for that,
Yes.
and kind of not be surprised when it happens. Like it can catch us off guard for sure, but I think just knowing it is an inevitable part of the grieving process, that certain things might come up. It might
Mhm.
shock you. Like a couple of people
Mhm.
I've worked with, and
Mhm.
my membership in one-on-one, like they're surprised when they're randomly crying about something. And then we're
Yeah.
going to get into this in another myth, but like there's something wrong with me. Like I don't understand, where are these
Mhm.
coming from? And then they're just like, oh my God, is this ever going to end? And it's like, well, maybe yes, maybe no, but like if grief never really kind of stops, like we just have to be diligent about
Mhm.
having ways to cope with it,
Mhm.
moment
Yeah.
and long term.
Yeah. And like when time passes, like people are learning how to cope with it, even if they're not like realizing that. And the way they're learning how to cope with it is like, I'm drinking a lot more. I am avoiding my life. I am stressing out and, turning to something else to help me cope. So the reason I don't like that myth that time heals all wounds, because it just sort of says that like healing is like just not an active process, something that just happens. But really, even if you don't realize that, you're trying to find ways to cope. And I would rather people be more empowered and self-directed about how they're helping themselves, rather than just being like, oh, I'm feeling better, but also I'm having these other problems in my life because of how I'm trying to cope with the grief.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a crazy balance. Like it really
Hmm.
is. There's so much gray area to it. It is a
Yeah.
day by day thing. Say it all the
Mhm.
time, but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well
Yeah.
said.
Sorry to bust everyone's bubble with that one.
I know. Seriously. Like I'm
Yeah.
sorry, but that is truly one of the biggest myths. But that's probably one of the ones I have the biggest issue with, because there's just so many
Yeah.
people with their opinions on it and stuff, and I'm like, oh my God, okay, well,
Yeah.
let's just be nice to ourselves here, okay?
I know. Absolutely.
Real quick interruption here, and then we'll get back to this episode. If you're someone who is experiencing some form of loss and are trying to navigate the complexities of grief, which you likely are in some capacity if you've stumbled upon this podcast, then this message is for you. If you haven't heard about my intentional Life After Loss membership and community yet, this is truly something you need to check out. This membership is here to guide you into living a deeper, more meaningful, and full life after experiencing loss. Who doesn't want that, right? I created this membership because I know what it's like to navigate and cope with grief on a daily basis. I know how hard that can be, and I know the tools and support it takes to do this effectively. I've done the work myself, and I've coached people just like you to do the same. It comes down to having impactful, effective resources and tools at your disposal, having the right support around you from people who can understand and empathize with your grief, and having encouragement and inspiration around you consistently to not only elicit and spark change, but to keep it and keep the positive momentum going. Enrollment opens once a month for a limited time. Check out the details linked in the description, and I hope to see you in there. All right, grief myth number 3. This is
Yeah.
another good. We're hitting so many good ones today.
We really are.
There are 5 stages of grief. Although
Yes.
I heard somewhere that there's like 7 now. I don't even know what those other two are. I don't know if that's a thing or whatever,
Yeah.
but I want to
Yeah.
hear your thoughts on this one too.
Okay. So the 5 stages of grief is a great way to think about like categories of feelings or emotions that we could experience. And then within each category, there's a lot of like, it's going to be really a personal experience. So it's not like 5 stages, like stair steps, like linear, this is how it's supposed to go. This research was done to understand and give people who were dying a voice and to help them, like to help the society understand like what are some feelings that people who are dying experience. It was never meant to be translated into all kinds of grief or this like, very specific
Blueprint
path.
or something.
Yeah, blueprint. Yeah, absolutely. But we have to remember that the time this research came out, like no one was talking about grief or death at all. So it really caught on because nobody was speaking about it. It didn't have any language at all. So it was really very, very helpful. And so now I don't like this myth because first of all, that's not even what the research said, but
Mhm.
I don't want people to be very rigid about their grief. Of course, we would like for things to happen in 5 easy stages with like a blueprint, but that's not going to be realistic. And you shouldn't try to be like beating yourself up or forcing yourself into these certain stages. If you want to think about it as categories, like I might need to look out for anger. I might be experiencing that. Maybe I'm having like bargaining or depression, like sadness. Like these are the things I could be looking out for, but they don't have to be happening in a certain way. And if you really want a roadmap for your grief, then create one with a grief professional. That's something you can do. But, trying to put your experience onto some research or someone else's experience isn't going to work because your grief is so unique.
Yeah. Yeah. This is one I was interviewing Grant Gary on the podcast a little while back, and he had it's like he was talking to somebody and they were like, oh, I think it was like in the film that he had done. And he was like, somebody was asking this person he was interviewing, like, have you experienced the 5 stages or have you gone through the 5 stages or whatever? And the person's response was, yeah, this morning.
I love
It
that.
was like, and I loved that because whether or not that's accurate, it's
Yeah.
more a
Mhm.
little lighthearted, but it's so true because like,
Mhm.
and it's funny too. I've had even family members that are just like, do you think you found like acceptance around
Mm,
it?
mm,
What is
mm,
acceptance anyway?
mm,
I think I actually said this in a recent episode. I literally was like, what is acceptance of the fact that I've lost my entire immediate family? As you can certainly relate to this, like it's just, I guess I'm resigned to it. Like I've come to terms with the fact that my parents are no longer here. That doesn't mean I don't have moments where I'm like, cannot believe they're not here. Like it's not, and in my mind, I don't know if that's acceptance or what, but I also am like, you know what? I'm not beating myself up about this because however I'm feeling in the moment is how I'm feeling. And I think what you hit on, I think like awareness is such an important part here. And it's why I always talk about I talk about breath work and meditation and things a lot. And whether anybody listening has like a specific breath work or a specific meditation thing, I'm not necessarily saying you need to start one, but I like that because you can it's just checking in with yourself. And like I love what you said like about anger, like if that's coming up for you, like I don't know what you'd recommend here, like feeling that, but just being aware that it is coming up for you. And kind of like we alluded to in one of the last myths, like holding space for that and digging deeper into that and being like, okay, why is this coming up for me today? And it's not like we have to like rack our brains about it, but just allowing that almost like learning process. I don't know how you would describe that, just to happen. And like for me, that's like the essence of getting to know your grief and understanding it and living with it in a way. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. Even though I knew that the 5 stages of grief was like bogus before
yeah.
I started grieving, I remember Googling it in my kitchen and being like, what are the 5 stages? It was just helpful for me to have some sort of like, it just helped me to have some sort of language and start piecing things together for myself and to feel like other people were out there grieving. It just like was a nice like entryway into some connection and some information or like about myself, my grief, but you don't need to stop there and try to fit into these categories. And there's just so much in each category. Like, like you spoke about acceptance. Acceptance might mean for me that like I'm not going to be making a meal for someone who's not here, but
Right.
I don't have to feel good about that. And I don't have to, stop thinking about them and be like glad that they're gone while I'm making the meal for the other people that are here. I can be thinking about that person that died and talking about them and I'm logically, I know that they're not here, but that
Mhm.
doesn't have to mean I feel like super great about it. So I think that's some of the problems we have with these emotions. It's like anger feels this way and
Yes,
acceptance feels this way. And it's just like, oh no,
exactly.
like it's just so much more complicated than that.
Yeah, yeah. And also too, like I think there are some people that, well, okay, I don't know, project anything. I personally, like, I don't, looking back too, because hindsight's kind of 2020, but like I don't
Mhm.
even remember going through like the bargaining process. Like that wasn't really a thing for me. And so I think that's just like, it's just an example, but I think that's just a
Mhm.
testament to like, a lot of people grieve very uniquely and grieve very differently. And so that's just another thing, which again, we're
Right.
going to touch on this later on, but like you said, we don't want to be so rigid with these 5 stages if we feel like we need to be that way, because like, first of all, it almost like doesn't allow ourselves to feel other things that are
Yeah.
coming up if we
Good
can't like
point.
define it, in one of these five. But then like, if I had been so rigid with myself, like, why aren't I bargaining with the God or the universe or whatever? Like, am I grieving wrong? Like, am I
Mhm.
moving backward in my grief? Like, what's happening? And I've,
Mhm.
spiraling can happen. I like when,
Yeah. Well, it's
when we,
helpful to know that like these stages were created when the psychologist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was interviewing people who were dying. So if you are terminal illness, there's this like moment where you're like, I'm gonna be a better person. I'm gonna eat
yeah,
right. If I can
right.
just, so like a
You don't have a
person
griever
might not
necessarily.
grieve that way.
Right.
Right. Hmm.
Yes. Yeah. Because I think didn't she had interviewed like doctors or something too. Like there was like
Hmm.
people that were dying, but then like professionals in the
Yep.
space. Like, there was a variety, and I don't. That's what's so interesting about the 5 stages. I don't think people know some of the detail, like
Yeah.
of it's on death and dying or of death and dying. What's the book? Well,
I think it's of
it's
death and
of death
dying.
and dying. Yeah.
But yeah,
Uh,
like it was just so taboo to talk about. So I think that's why people like love it and we like these like really specific roadmaps, but like
yeah.
you might not experience that bargaining period, or you might experience it, but it doesn't look like what you think bargaining would
Yeah.
be. Maybe
Yeah.
there's some bargaining with yourself of like, I'm not gonna allow myself to like really lose my shit. Like I'm gonna keep it together,
Yes.
and it's like,
Great
well, good
point.
luck with that.
I know, seriously. And not to go down a rabbit hole, this is all I'll
Yeah.
say. What show was I? I
Mhm.
can't believe I'm saying this. Was it Love is Blind? There was some show I was watching recently where they were like, be strong, don't cry, don't
Oh
lose it right now.
no.
And I literally was like, no, lose
No.
it. It's okay if you
Yeah.
have to. Or maybe it was like Vanderpump Rules. I don't know. It was some really trashy show. But it was like, and it was constant. It was just like, no, don't lose it. No, be strong, whatever.
Oh.
So this is like a little bit irrelevant to the stages of what we're talking about. But, it's just like, I don't know, allow those emotions to come in, because it could be more than one of those five, right? Like it's,
Mhm. Mhm.
that digging deep we've kind of been talking about. So
Yeah.
important, getting to know your
Mhm.
specific grief and how it shows up for you, because how it's going to show up for you is not going to be how it shows up for someone else. And even if you like, in theory, like lost the same person, right? Like, or if you like both lost a parent or both lost a sibling,
Mhm.
whatever, you had different relationships with them. They meant something different to each of us. Like,
Yeah.
you know, there's, yeah,
Yeah, it's just not black and white, and that's what we want it to be, and it's not.
yeah,
And that's okay. I find a lot of like healing in that too, that it can be both and it doesn't
yeah,
have to be black and white. And of course, at the beginning, that could be really scary.
yeah, yeah. Because you're just like, oh my God, is this like, I don't know, I'm just spitballing. Is this ever going to end? Like, am I ever going
Yeah.
to feel
Yeah.
normal? Is this ever going to like stop popping up randomly? Like, am I ever not going to be a mess walking through the grocery store? Like, come on, like this is exhausting. And it is
Mhm.
exhausting for sure.
It
But
is. Yeah.
all the more
Yeah.
reason to, like you said, work with someone if you need to, find the right support. It will, there's ways, you know, around it, through it, whatever you want to use.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's ways to go. That's the moral of the story.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So last myth here. This is another really good one that I think is really important. And this is another one that I think can be imposed on us from some other people. And I want to obviously, of course, first hear what you have to say on this one, but it's interesting to me how people feel like they can speak on this.
Mm,
I'll leave it at
mhm.
that. And
Okay.
this myth is your loved one wouldn't want you to be sad.
Yeah. This one feels like a cousin to everything happens for a reason for me.
Yeah.
Like they
Yeah.
are these grief catchphrases that people love to say, and also we love to say them to ourselves as well. It's a ton of pressure.
Yeah.
If other people are saying that to you, I mean, that's something that I heard a lot, especially after my mom died. It
Mhm.
wasn't exactly your loved one wouldn't want you to be sad. So I want to tell this story so that like people can kind of understand that these myths might not be word for word. But I remember saying to a family member after my mom died, like, I'm all alone now. And they're like, no, you're not. You have your brothers. And I was like, no,
I'm so glad
I'm
you brought that
all
up.
alone.
Because like I actually am, just let me wallow in my aloneness
Yeah,
for a second. And like
yeah,
I'm laughing about that and joking now. But
yeah.
seriously, I felt the exact same way after my parents died. Or I'd be like, I'm kind of by myself. I still do this, by the way. And many people are like, no, you have a support system, honey. We're here for
Mhm.
you. But I understand that.
Yeah,
But not the people you're not my mom. You're not my respectfully, like,
yeah. Right, right.
because just let
Mm,
me freaking feel this.
absolutely.
Like,
Yes, yes. And like what I was really saying is like I don't have my parents and my sister anymore, and that those pillars in my life are gone, And so yeah, so I think that people are really in a hurry to make us cheer up, to feel good. I can assume it comes from a great place of like wanting to do the right thing and be there for us. But I think really what it comes down to for me is that people are uncomfortable with sadness. And when we express our sadness, people need to shut it down and it feels super invalidating. And I feel like I see this a lot with clients from like spiritual families in particular. My friend said this thing the other day. He's a therapist and he said it's called spiritual bypassing. It's
oh,
like you
yes.
can't be sad or ungrateful because there's a higher power. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's good. I need to remember that. Probably like a real term. I need to learn some more about it. But yeah, I think it just can be invalidating for ourselves or for others. Like we need to put a lot of pressure on ourselves, or when we say that to other people, it's like we are uncomfortable with their sadness and they need to wrap it up. And that feels really bad when we get
Yeah.
sent that message.
Totally. Yeah. And it's just like, yeah, sometimes I say this all the time, but like we just need to be heard and
Mm,
seen and validated in a way. And sometimes it's like it kind of goes along with like those things of like what to say to a griever. And
mhm.
sometimes there's just nothing to really
Yeah.
say. It's just been
Yeah.
like, you know what? Well, however you want, I'm paraphrasing now, I can't even begin to understand. Like,
Mhm.
I'm giving you
Yeah.
the biggest hug. I see you. I
Mhm.
can't imagine how hard it is, whatever it is, just almost, it's such a delicate balance. And I'm curious your thoughts on this, and I'll mention one other kind of like indirect example of this too, because I'm curious on
Mhm.
your thoughts, but like, it's just like allowing them to be sad and like I'm gonna use the word wallowing again because I don't really have a better word for it right now. It's
Mhm.
sort of like allowing them to just sit with that.
Mhm.
But it's we have to be careful. Like it's a slippery slope maybe. But this another example of this came up for me recently. I mentioned my daughter's birth and how that was
Mhm.
quite traumatic. And so for those who don't know or haven't heard this yet, she was 5 weeks early, but not only was she preemie, she had some very severe issues with blood loss, and she was very painfully close to not making it.
Mhm.
So a lot of people had heard like, oh, she's a preemie. Preemies make it all the time. Oh, I know so and so or my cousins, kid was a
Mhm.
preemie, and she was even more preemie than yours, and and
Mhm.
all of these comparisons. And actually,
Yeah.
this could totally be another myth too, but
Yeah, that's
it's
yeah.
it's just one of those things where I'm just like, I I appreciate that because like I understand it is coming from a place of love,
Mhm.
just like I think this your loved one wouldn't want you to be sad kind of a
Mhm.
thing. Because
Mhm.
people also made that comparison with my parents too. They were just like, your parents are with you. They just want you to enjoy this time that you have right now.
Mm.
First of all, please don't speak for my loved one. You're
Yeah,
probably right, but please don't speak for my loved one.
yeah,
Number
yeah.
two, it just completely it really invalidates like what we're feeling, what we're going through. And I understand why people were saying those things to me in the moment, like, oh, so and so's kid was absolutely fine. Like they're happy and healthy now. And I'm like, first of all, you don't totally understand because you don't know the details of what we've been going through. You don't understand her specific health issues, how close she was to not surviving, the checkups that we're going to have, like all of these afterward things. Like even some of my
Yeah,
best friends, like we're not understanding. They kind of just
yeah.
coming at me with like, oh, well, she'll be totally fine. Don't worry about it. Just all of those like
Mm.
super minimizing phrases. and stuff like that, like, just be grateful, just be grateful she's doing okay right now, and like that kind of thing. And I'm like, in the moment, even amidst like the chaos of that, like grief happening right then and there, because she's still in the NICU or whatever was happening at the time, I knew that they meant well. And I knew what they were saying was out of love. And it was to like get me to worry less or whatever they were trying to accomplish.
Yeah, whatever.
But it really,
Mm.
for me, I was almost like, you're not even taking the time to like hear
Mhm.
me. Are you really understanding this, what I'm explaining to you in this text message? Or are you really hearing me when I'm talking to you about this on the phone, and how our situation is unique to us? Like, please don't
Mhm.
compare it. And so that's a whole, again, subset,
Yeah.
I feel like, of this
That's
myth a
such a
little
good
bit.
point, because I mean, that's a grief that you have to go through all this, that your daughter's birth and these follow-up appointments and the first like weeks of her life weren't what you like expected and planned, and that it is like invalidating for someone to compare and to downplay it. And really what I have found for myself and with my clients is, if like I just let myself or someone lean into that sadness, it comes, it peaks, and then it goes. And that like naturally we just sort of get to the other side of it and feel better. But like if you're not letting me have that experience of getting it out, then I it just builds up. It doesn't get better. I have to like push it all down. That's why it reminds me of the first everything happens for a reason myth, because like this like I'm avoiding like the pain, and really you are helping by letting me get it out and by like being there with me when I cry and like letting me be upset. And I think that we need to get better at being comfortable with that for ourselves and for the people that we love, and realize like when someone I'm working with starts crying, I'm not worried about it. Like I know it's going to like resolve. But like,
Yeah.
and they're going to feel so much better on the other side of it. And I don't have to do anything
Yes.
except be there while that's
Talk about
happening.
it, cry, let them release
Mhm.
it, whatever. Yeah, I think so well said. Like, I feel like the crux of this one is like just getting comfortable with sadness.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
feel, and a lot of us, I understand why
Yeah.
people try to put a band-aid over it, right? Like they're
Yeah.
not comfortable with that themselves. So
Right.
why it makes them uncomfortable to see it in others. And
Mhm.
I get it in a way, especially our loved ones and our friends and family, they don't want to see us sad. Like, so while I understand it, definitely I think work to be done, and just
Mhm.
being like, you know what, I can only imagine what you're going through right now, or whatever people want to say about it, but just ultimately letting them have their
Mhm.
moment, feel the feels, and not
Mhm.
just, like I said, try and put kind of like,
That's so interesting. I just thought of something that I hadn't really thought about before. I'm just like kind of figuring this out right now, but it's an honor to see me sad because I'm not sad with people that are not safe. So
I
like if I'm not safe with you, I'm not going to be sad with you. And I
love.
have learned, I've been sad with people and I have learned that they're not safe, and I will not do it again. I'm a Taurus, I'm very stubborn. Once I know you're not going to be safe, I'm not doing it again. And so I protect my sadness and take it to people I know are going to be gentle with it. So if you are my loved one and you're getting to see me in that intimate, vulnerable space, like that's really meaningful. I'm not just like blah, sad to everyone all the time.
I need Tom, Dick, and Harry on the street. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I literally got chills when you
Oh.
said like the feeling safe, like with
Mhm.
your son. Oh my God, I hadn't really thought about that too before. So I feel like that makes it even harder going to people.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And then so you're
totally.
being so vulnerable, and then to have them kind of, well,
Hmm.
it might be out of love, like kind
Hmm.
of tamp it down. You're fine. It's gonna be okay. This
Yeah.
was up in the radar. You know what I mean? Whatever the grief
Yeah.
looks like, it's the loss of a loved one or just a difficult time you're going through, right? Like
Hmm.
loss of a job, a divorce, whatever.
Hmm.
Now, especially like
Hmm.
any of these like,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know, positive affirmations, whatever you want to call them, are like, thrown at us, like you're just like, wow, okay, I felt kind of safe with you doing this, but now you reacted that way, so now I don't even feel safe with you. Oh my God, who do I turn to? Like,
Yeah.
said
Yeah.
this too, and I think this is again just such a testament to getting the right help, or just finding the right, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a grief coach, support group, whatever. Like I say this all the time, you can have very loving people around you. You can have support systems, like it sounds like both you and I do, and our partners, whoever, but if they don't really get it, or they're, and kind of no fault of their own, not the best at like just seeing you and letting you be sad and validating that or whatever. And they're maybe not comfortable with that, which is okay. We can't force anybody to be that way. You know, we can try and get them to open up to it, but that's not our job. All the more reason I think that finding the right people around you, or just, and honestly, sometimes it's almost like, sometimes almost more comfortable going to strangers with it, or going to people who are almost like a little more unbiased, but they've seen loss too, or they've been through loss, and like they can empathize with it in a different way, or give you that sort of like third party perspective on it or whatever. So I don't know. I know some people are uncomfortable with maybe getting help or talking to a stranger, so to speak, but like there are some blessings. I did therapy myself, and it was like really therapeutic at the time, because I was like, oh my God, no one can understand in my life, even though I have a lot of love around me, nobody can understand what it was to lose two parents, be the only daughter of Greg and Lori Jordan, and lose my dog a year later, you know, all the things. And so you're just like kind of out on a limb by yourself, but you don't have to be. And so it is sometimes, you know, comforting finding other people that can.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you said. We'll definitely address this later, and some other myths about like getting some like a neutral party and bias support. But also, like, if you are the person who's saying my loved one wouldn't want me to be sad, like you're not even safe with yourself to be sad, that's really a sign that like you might need some support. Because, and it's no fault of yours, like we have been like brainwashed in a way to be positive, and if you're not happy, you need to buy this product to make you happy, and it's your fault that you're not happy. So like you have to remember that all these messaging that we get, and that's why I wanted to talk about these myths, because we do get all these messages about grief and sadness that are really not helpful. They're like counterintuitive, because we need to move towards the pain, and sometimes we don't even know how to start doing that. So like this mini series is a great way to just even open the door a little bit and start looking and start exploring with yourself, like writing some of these journal prompts out, and start just getting to know your grief and getting to know yourself. And like we have kind of illustrated, there's some different ways that these myths show up, and so it's important to take some time and sit with them and ask yourself, like, what am I believing that could be, you know, hindering me in a way, or like increasing my avoidance, or, you know, putting a lot of pressure on myself, or not allowing myself to go deep. So I think just getting to know your grief is so important.
Yeah. Beautifully said. I think that's like a perfect place to end this, at least for this episode. I feel like we covered a lot in one of a short period of time. Like we said, all of these we could go into so much more detail about, but I really do hope for anybody listening today that these just helped at least scratch the surface and just, first of all, make you just feel a little less alone, and that all of these things that we're talking about in today's episode and the rest are very, very common. They're seen a lot. There's a lot of complexities to each one. There's different relationships we have to have with each one. And so it's just, you know, being so gentle with ourselves, you know, and other people too around us.
Right. This is also great for people like who want to increase their grief literacy, because like they are an HR professional, a teacher, you know, or their best friend is grieving. Like it's just helpful for us to kind of know about these myths. You know, we're so good at talking about all these different things in society today, all these like once taboo things. So I think that grief is sort of the next hurdle that we can do together as a society. And I'm hopeful that this would help, and that people can just start to get to know themselves, whether or not they're grieving right now, you know, because like loss is inevitable. It's not like if you go through a hard loss in your life, but like when you go through a big change, a death, a loss, illness in your own life, like this is something that you're going to go through. And so having some literacy around it is going to be really, really helpful.
Yeah. Amazing. All right. Well, your mini series is everything's going to be linked in the show notes as well. Really quick, where can people find you on social media and all the good things?
Yeah. So Instagram, TikTok, The Grief Girly, also my website, thegriefgirly.com.
Perfect. Amazing. Okay. So we will see you all again in the next iteration of this series. We have some other really good, controversial, but also juicy topics to get into. I'm super excited, but Shea, thank you so much for your time today. This was weirdly fun to talk about.
I am glad. I love how positive you are. That always like helps when you're talking about these heavy things.
We can, I always joke, we can laugh about it now.
Yeah. Now.
Thank you so much, Shea.
All right, thank you.
I am sending you a huge thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. I'm so grateful you're here and for the steps you are taking to heal your heart, open your mind, fulfill your soul, learn, grow, and evolve, and move through this crazy thing called life in big, beautiful, impactful ways. Visit lossesbecomegains.com for my blog, ways to work with me, to shop my daily journal, and so much more. And be sure you're following along on Instagram and Facebook at Life with Grief Podcast. I love seeing new faces, meeting new people, hearing your stories, and supporting you however I can. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you haven't left a rating or a review, please do so. I would so appreciate it. Or if you feel so inclined, to share this episode or this podcast with someone who could use it too. I'll catch you in the next episode.